In today's video, we are going to replace a power steering pump on a 2005 Jeep Liberty. The pulley came off the pump, so the drive belt is off the engine. The engine still starts and runs, but obviously no power steering, no water pump, no alternator, etc. Let's drive this thing inside the shop and pop the hood. The nice thing about this job, you don't really need a lift. And look at that, the pulley came out of the pump with the shaft, and a bunch of power steering fluid came out. This is what it's supposed to look like, and this is what we have. So today we are going to replace the pump, install a new pulley, and replace the pressure hose as well. And here is a list of tools we're going to use. Pliers and a small screwdriver, a ratchet with a deep 13 and a regular 15mm socket, smaller 1/4-inch drive ratchet with a 10mm socket, a 10mm wrench, 16 and 22mm wrenches as a pair, 18mm wrench, and a power steering pulley, puller, and installer kit, which will require a 1/2-inch and a 1-inch wrenches. Also a drain pan to catch the old fluid, and a quart of power steering fluid, which in our case is ATF +4 automatic transmission fluid. Let's get this belt out of here. Now if your pulley is still on the pump and the belt is in place, the first thing you would need to do is remove it. If you don't have a belt routing diagram, it is best to draw one for reinstallation purposes. This is the belt tensioner. Using a ratchet with a 15mm socket, you turn it clockwise to loosen the tension and remove the belt. Check the belt for cracks, fraying, or any damage, because if you need a new one, now is the time to get it. First, we're going to move this hose out of the way, remove the cap, and pull the old fluid out of the reservoir. You can use a rubber bulb syringe, but I'm using Mightyvac fluid evacuator, running off of compressed air. With most of the fluid out, let's place a drain pan under the car and some rags under the pump. If your pulley is still on, your best bet is to try to disconnect the pressure hose now, while the pump is still bolted to the engine. I'm going to try to disconnect it using a 16mm line wrench. This kind of wrench has more points of contact, so there is less chance of rounding off the knot as you're trying to loosen it. Unfortunately, the 22mm nut that screws into the pump broke loose first, and that's what our 16mm pressure hose nut screws into. So now the whole hose is moving, not letting me break it loose. And if you're not sure what I'm talking about, just bear with me for another minute, because you may run into the same problem. Now let's unbolt the pump from the engine. It is held by 3 13mm bolts that you can access through the openings in the pulley, if you still have one. With the pump unbolted, we can move it around to gain better access and disconnect the hoses. Unscrew the pressure hose from the pump using a 22mm and a 16mm wrenches. 22mm nut stays in the pump, and the 16mm flare nut is a part of the pressure hose. Quick side note, if the pulley is in the way and you can't fit the 22mm wrench in there, you will either have to remove the pulley now, which I will show how to do in a couple of minutes, or you're going to have to disconnect the pressure hose from the other side, from the rack, and remove the pump with the pressure hose, which I will also show how to do later in the video. Next, using pliers, move down the clamp on the return hose and twist it off the pump, and the pump is out. Now, normally we would have a pulley on the old pump that would need to be switched over to the new pump using a kit, like this. Now, with this kit, you can do both, remove pulleys and install them. To remove, we are going to take this jaw and sleeve assembly. You can see it has an oval shape opening on one side and a round opening on the other. Install the round side on the pulley flange, like this, and place the puller body on the other side of the jaws. and slide the sleeve over. Next, we'll take this jack screw and match it with a puller pin that fits our application better. Place the pin inside the jack screw and screw it in the puller body until we can't turn it by hand any longer. Grab a 1" and a 1/2" wrenches and turn the jack screw in until the pulley comes off. Now, to install this pulley on the new pump, we are going to pick a screw installer that can be screwed into our pump shaft. Place the pulley over the shaft. Make sure the flange is pointing outwards. If you place the pulley upside down, removing it will be a nightmare because you won't have anything for the jaws to grab onto. But also, the pulley will be misaligned from the rest of the pulleys driven by the drive belt. Next, screw the short end of the installing screw into the jack screw. Place the bearing and the washer over the jack screw with the washer being on the outside, pointing toward the pulley. And screw the jack screw into the pump until it won't go any further. Once the shaft starts turning with the jack screw, bring the nut down until it is flush with the pulley. Once it stops, use 1/2" wrench to hold the jack screw in place and use a 1" wrench to turn the puller body nut clockwise until it stops. Once it stops, back the nut off and see if the pulley is flush with the shaft. If it is not, you may have to use a shorter installer screw to push the pulley all the way down until it is flush with the shaft. And now our new pump is ready to be installed in the car. But before we do that, we are going to replace the pressure hose. With the pump out of the way, it is the best time to do it. It goes right there. There is a bracket there with 2 screws. And then it loops around and goes back into the rack and pinion, right there. So first we're going to unclip and remove this grill piece. There is a few slots at the top of it that you pry up and the whole grill comes out. Then remove 2 screws holding the headlight. Disconnect the connector. And here we can see the 2 screws holding the pressure hose bracket. I am using a 10mm wrench to remove them. This is probably not the fastest way to do it, but it works. And if you know a faster way, make sure to share it with the rest of us in the comments below. The one closer to me runs into the plastic piece that holds the headlight. I'm going to remove a couple more screws to let this plastic piece move around a little more. And now both screws can be removed. Second screw can also be accessed with an extension and a swivel socket instead of an open-end wrench. Now with an 18mm wrench, preferably a flare nut wrench or a line wrench, we unscrew the other side of the pressure hose from the rack and pinion. Next, remove the hose from the vehicle and compare the old hose with the new one to make sure everything is the same. New hose comes with new O-rings. Put those on and put a drop of power steering fluid on them. In this particular vehicle, we are using automatic transmission fluid ATF Plus 4 as power steering fluid. Before we install the new hose, let's clean out the area of the rack where the hose fits in. We don't want any dirt to get stuck in there and plug up the fluid flow or get inside the rack, causing excessive wear and premature failure of the internal components. Next, put the new hose in, install everything loosely. First, screw it into the rack. Make sure the return hose goes on top, like this. Then put in the bracket screws. And lastly, we will screw it into the pump. First, let's put on the return hose held by the clamp, and then get the pressure hose started. Clean the area the pump bolts to, clean out the bolt holes, and clean the bolts. I'm using a metal brush to do it. Using a deep socket or a socket with an extension, install the bolts through the openings in the pulley. You may have to wiggle the pump a little bit to line them up with the holes. With all 3 bolts installed, I'm going to torque them to 35 foot-pounds. And now, with everything in place, we can tighten up the pressure hose at the pump and at the rack. For the rest of the installation, reverse the removal procedure. Install the headlight. There is a notch right there that goes in first, then 2 screws, then goes the grill. Install the belt, fill up the reservoir. Now, the next step is not absolutely necessary, but helps with air bleeding. I'm going to raise the front wheels off the ground and turn them left and right a few times before starting the engine. Now recheck the fluid one more time, reconnect the battery if you had it disconnected, start the car and let it run for a minute. Recheck the fluid level and all the connection points for leaks. And now we can take it for a test drive. Then check everything one last time and consider this job done. After coming back from the test drive, I noticed that the belt was squeaking. I had a new belt ordered, but they didn't bring it to me in time. That's why I installed the old one to try everything out, but you saw the belt was bad and needed to be replaced. So after I installed a new belt, there is no more squeak. Another reason your belt could be squeaking is if you didn't install the pulley all the way on the pump, which would cause the belt to run crooked. If this video was helpful, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing if you want to see more videos of this kind, share your experience and give me feedback in the comments below. Thank you for watching, good luck and take care.